philosophers have convinced their audience that stupid ideas are really great ideas. I'm not sure that my words will be the exception to that unfortunate practice. The Swedish Academy gave the Nobel Prize to Kant understand for his book, What the Hell Did the Philosopher Mean? What Kant understand did was to reveal the meaning of sentences as the nothing of Heidegger. If the being and the nothing had any determination, they would be a certain being and a certain nothing, not the pure being or the pure nothing, as they still are here, of Hegel. I will start, this is another way of saying that I will do my best to reduce the glide. Kant understand also helps to reveal the meaning of an idea of Gorgias the sophist, who said, nothing exists, and if something exists, we cannot know it, and if we cannot know it, we cannot communicate it. You know that solipsist philosophers said that the world is an emanation of our mind, as a sexual fantasy, as a ghost story. And many philosophers thought that they don't exist, and even worse, they convinced others that they don't exist. And Bert Christensen imagined a label of a commercial product written by a solipsist philosopher. It would say, the consumer should know that he may be the only entity in the universe, and therefore any product defect is his fault. Kant understand also analyzes the ontological argument of St. Anselm. What St. Anselm said is that if we can imagine being with all perfections, that being exists. He confuses existence in thought with existence in reality, as if it would be the same to think that you won $1 million and winning $1 million, or as it would be the same as thinking you are with Richard Gere at bed and being with Richard Gere at bed. So all these concepts, says Kant understand, leave the reader astonished, puzzled, confused, that is, with a deep philosophical spirit. As Voltaire points out, when the one who speaks doesn't understand what he says, and the one who listens doesn't understand what he says, that is metaphysics. Or as Jorge Luis Borges says, metaphysics is a chapter of fantasy literature, or as Cioran points out, it's like a religion, but more stupid. Another problem, says Kant understand, is that philosophers want to create a own language and impose it to the rest of the people. But then that language would be too common, so they create another language and impose it to the rest of the people. It's like email passwords. You have to change them every month in order to maintain things as always. A bad philosopher is a person who says very stupid things in such a confusing way that they seem to be smart. Those who listen to them feel humiliated for not understanding, and because they prefer to be on the side of the smart and not on the side of the stupid, they often self-deceive themselves by believing that they stick to respectable concepts. If the philosopher reaches certain fame in the social media, the stupidity that he spreads increases geometrically. Women fake orgasms, men fake love, and philosophers fake to say something interesting, complicating their sentences unnecessarily. Another problem is that when you understood the first Derrida, the first Husserl, you then have to understand the second one. That generally contradicts the first one. So we have a question here. Why are those philosophers so dark? Is it because darkness is irrefutable? Is it because they just imitate other philosophers that write as a bad German translation? Or is it because they want to differentiate themselves from other people? That is a form of snobism. The question that people ask me when they come to my philosophical cafe is, will I understand? Because they think that the language of philosophers is like an exotic language spoken in the Congo. The other day, a friend of mine went to a philosophy talk and he told me, I understood everything that the philosopher said. Is he really a good philosopher? So we have a first problem with traditional philosophy, darkness. We have a second problem, that is irrelevant issues. Many philosophers talk about irrelevant issues, and they dilute so much their issues that they are as homeopathic drugs, only water and no significant element. They know more and more about less and less, and one day they will know everything about nothing. And we have a third problem. Philosophy is still too based in the principle of authority. Many philosophers are like widows. They dedicate their whole life to the memory of one philosopher. So it's like riding always on the horse about the authority of other philosophers. By the way, this is a sentence of a famous philosopher, Schopenhauer. So philosophy is a dialogue between generations. It doesn't matter who said what, but what can be said and done to change the world. Is philosophical counseling free of this principle of authority? Because we can say that traditionally, philosophy was born in opposition to the principle of authority. Things are true because we have reasons for that, because we have evidences, and not because of a religious authority or a political authority. Philosophy is that. It's thinking in an autonomous way. But throughout centuries, philosophy has become the opposite. Many things seem to be true just because a famous philosopher has said it. So let's take Aristotle, for example. Aristotle thought that women have less teeth than men. He was married twice, so it is likely that he never opened the mouth of any of his two wives. And during centuries, people repeated that women have less teeth than men. So this is a small example of dogmatic thought in one of our great philosophers. So one question that we can ask is philosophical counseling free of this principle of authority? My answer is, in many methods used in philosophical counseling, this principle of authority is absolutely present. For example, the philosophical counselor says that the counselee must make a question. And so when the counselee makes a question, the philosophical counselor takes one word that he considers absolutely representative of a personality trait, and he asks the counselee, do you agree with my interpretation? First problem, he considers that if the counselee accepts the interpretation, that interpretation is right. And we know, because of a lot of research, that we are not always the best person to know ourselves. We can deceive ourselves. So that is the first problem. The second problem is that we know, because of the Barnum effect, that when people are willing to know something about themselves, they tend to accept what it is said. And we know also, because of the research of Elizabeth Loftus, that when people are manipulated throughout questions, they tend to think almost anything. Even you can induce false memories. And there is another usual practice. For example, the philosophical counselor asks, do you accept this interpretation? And if the counselee says, no, I don't accept it, the philosophical counselor says, well, you are not collaborating, and if you don't collaborate, we cannot move forward. This is very similar to the psychoanalytic principle of authority, of resistance. It has nothing to do with philosophy. Up to now, philosophical counseling and philosophy in general is based on intuitions. We have a lot of research in the world, especially philosophical issues that are being investigated by cognitive psychology. And we know that some of those intuitions are right and some are not. So I think that we should test philosophers' intuitions, many of them, not all of them, we cannot test all of them, but including methods on philosophical counseling. What do we mean when we say this idea of Kierkegaard, melancholic people have more sense of humor, is a good idea. Do we mean that we agree with this idea? Do we mean that as we like this philosopher very much, this idea must be true? But this is not enough. We should test the idea. If we say that melancholic people have more sense of humor, we shouldn't repeat this just because of the principle of authority, because Kierkegaard is a prestigious philosopher, or because we have him. We should test, and we can test this. So I would like to tell you, probably you know it, that there is a movement now in philosophy whose name is experimental philosophy. Here we have an armchair that is burning, because what they want to mean is that philosophers have been sitting down in an armchair during all history, and now we have to stand up and we have to test that intuitions. I'm working in this field in experimental philosophy, and I would like to share with you some of my work related to the principle of authority. I ask myself, when people agree with an idea, how much are they influenced by the author of that idea, especially when that author is a very prestigious person or philosopher? So I tested this idea. Fortunately, many people come to my philosophical cafe. I do 4 philosophical cafes each weekend. So I did several experiments with 500 people in different conditions. The first condition was very similar to what we did first. I gave several sentences and I asked them, how much do you agree with this sentence? In the second condition, I gave the same sentence with an authority figure. Einstein said it. Gandhi said it. What do you think that happened? When I asked them, how much do you think that the sign can influence you, more than 90% said nothing. It doesn't influence me. But in the research, I found out that from 10 to 30%, sometimes 50% when you have Einstein, people were influenced by a prestigious sign. If the sentence is very good or very, very original, the sign doesn't influence so much. Why does this happen? Does it have some evolutionary advantage? For example, we don't have all the time of the world to make a decision, so perhaps trusting in certain authorities can be useful. But this has a downside, that is, that you can take very bad decisions only trusting in an authority figure. I did this experiment in another condition. I asked people, who did you vote in the last elections? And I showed them several sentences of politics. And when they had voted for that politic, they put from 10% to 30% more of value. If they hadn't, they rested from 10 to 30% of value. This happens in Argentina. I would like to do the same research in other countries to see if this is the same or not. Philosophical counseling has differentiated itself from academic philosophy, not focusing on authority figures, but on philosophical reflection. The subjects of the philosophical cafes are usually not based on the name of philosophers, but on philosophical ideas. To be consistent with this project, we must stop repeating dogmatically the insights of philosophers and test them when it is possible. We must base our practice on scientific evidence, even when philosophy exceeds the perimeter of science, and reject all authoritarian practices that impose ideas based on authority and are not based on evidence. Philosophers should start doing empirical research and dialogue with other disciplines. We have a lot of work to do. I made a very short video of 6 minutes showing the first philosophical museum, as far as I know, in the world. I built it in the place where I do my philosophical cafe. It is not based on the authority of the philosophers, but on the value of the ideas. We have several walls with different subjects: the virtue wall, the happiness wall, the humor wall, the philosophy wall. It's 6 minutes. We see that and it's over. Okay? ahí, gracias. Un día que dice que no me está ganando de Colombia. Tu matrimonio está en problemas y tu mujer te dice solo te interesa una cosa y no podés recordar cuál era. El mecanismo de crecimiento de la analogía. Muy efectivo. Vamos a ver ahora un pequeño fragmento de San Especial. Una forma de practices es buscar una comparación con algo que resulte atractivo o muy contrastante. Gracias a todos por venir a la
Any questions, comments?
I have a very practical one. How do people, do you get paid? The answer is a normal coffee. How does it work?
In the philosophical cafe, yes, people pay an entry, yeah, they do. Yeah.
And you negotiate with the coffee shop?
No, I prefer everything. I cook the cookies, and when we do blankets, I cook absolutely all.
And the space is yours also?
I bought it with the money I earned with the philosophical cafe in 12 years of hard work. Yes. It's a big saloon. Yeah. I am here paid by the philosophical cafe. Yeah. I live from my philosophical cafe, and in Argentina, as I published my book of philosophical counseling in 2002, suggesting that this should be a profession. Everyone that has a philosophical cafe has an entrance and lives, makes a living for that.
But it's not the first time that you say that philosophy should be experimented. And I know that positive psychology, for example, takes philosophical ideas and try to see if they work, and it do it very badly, you know, positive psychology. So I think, and I've written about that somewhere, that part of philosophy should be created according to the needs, the necessities of the age, and also according to some kind of empirical research. And I thought that part of philosophical practice should do this. But there is always a part of philosophy that would stay non-experimental. This is a prescriptive part.
Probably you remember that in the video it said that philosophy isn't all experimental, and it shouldn't be all experimental. To say that positive psychology is bad is not an argument, it's just a qualification. I don't work in positive psychology. The persons that work in a good way, from my point of view, are Daniel Kahneman, Jonathan Haidt. There are a lot of psychologists that work philosophical issues, and there are a lot of philosophers now that in the experimental philosophy are taking philosophical issues because, as I said before, they think that up to now philosophy was based in intuitions, and we have to test some of those intuitions. That doesn't mean that now philosophy will be only experimental. This means that if we say things that are related to things that can be tested, we should test them and stop repeating them based on the principle of authority. It's just that idea.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say, never meant to say that positive psychology is bad. I said that when you see the philosophical ideas in positive psychology, you often think that philosophers could have explained those ideas better and test them better. It was a point in favor of testing ideas, not against positive psychology.
We are better than everyone. But nevertheless, it would be good to conserve the good parts of philosophy that have nothing to do with experimental research, but it would be nice to incorporate these things, especially in an empirical discipline as philosophical counseling. Nobody is doing research in philosophical counseling, as far as I know. Hard research. I'm not talking about case studies. Case studies, I knew that Maria is working in this. and I'm very glad that she's working this, but it is the first case, as far as I know, people working in experimental issues related to philosophical counseling.
Alexander?
Just a brief practical question. To what extent have you found that you were in a position to entertain people rather than provide them with philosophical feedback? Have you had to juggle the two functions? Do you find them always compatible? Do you face situations where people expect you to entertain them for the fee rather than to learn something through the philosophical cafe? What do you experience?
Well, I think that it's good thinking that a class should be good from that point of view. If somebody is bored and he is sleeping, and I give my philosophical cafes at night, 2 on Fridays, 7 o'clock in the afternoon, 10:30 at night, and the same on Saturday. They have to be amused, but I don't think that that is incompatible. I think that it's not contradictory. You can give a very good class, and people come to the philosophical cafes for many reasons. Most of them come because they are interested in philosophy, in practical philosophy. But many of them also come because they want to have new friends, they want to have a boyfriend, they just feel lonely. When I started, I thought, oh, they all come because they love philosophy, they heard about my cafe. Sometimes they come and they look at the women that are, and they find them too old, and they go away. So philosophy, and I think that this is a good thing, it's not only in the places where courses are, but in the leisure time, like going to the cinema, like going to the theater. That's a very good thing. In Argentina, we have that space for philosophy, and people just come because a friend told them come this Saturday, and then they come because they want to. And I think that we should gain those spaces, and also the spaces that have to do with social media. I have 2 channels in YouTube, and I started uploading just 10 minutes or 15 minutes of my philosophical cafes, and more people started seeing them. More than 500,000 people have seen those channels now, and I really want philosophy to be there, because since the moment YouTube gave 1 hour or more, and not only 15 minutes, you can upload entire classes. So I uploaded a philosophical counseling. All this is tape recorded now and will be uploaded. So it would be very good that all of you try to put your things in YouTube. I listen to the Yale courses in YouTube. I think that the most revolutionary thing in internet is really YouTube, because we can share philosophy, we can share ideas, and it's like being there. It's really a very useful tool, and we can use it to spread ideas.
Do you make workshops with them, or it's just teaching?
No, it's 1 hour of theoretical exposition, then we have a break for coffee and for cookies, and then there is 1 hour of debate.
Testing of that to me. You had the sentence of Heidegger, it was a bit quick, but I think it was something like nothing. Is the problem with that it is not tested? What's the problem with that statement? It is not tested, so should it be tested?
It's not testable.
It's not tested?
No, I said that not all philosophy can be tested.
So you don't say that all philosophy has to be tested?
No, I didn't say that.
But
I wrote it down also.
But what was the problem with that sentence?
For me, I'm sorry, because I can intuitively say that you think that sentence is good. For me, it means nothing.
But that is an intuition, and that is based upon not understandable translation into English. And you can't just take a philosophical sentence by Heidegger out of its context and present it as if it was nonsense.
Well, I had only 25 minutes. I've studied Heidegger in university, and I lost my hope of understanding that sentence of Heidegger and many other sentences of Heidegger and many other philosophers. So
that's okay, but I mean the problem is not the lack of testability.
no, my critique to that sentence of Heidegger hasn't to do with the testability, but with the darkness of the language.
Criticism, a famous criticism to that sentence was the criticism of Carnap, who said that it was a reification of the null quantifier. So there is an argument, and Carnap will, of course, read it in German, so it's not a problem of the translation.
Kant was a particular criticist.
Yes, that's
Isn't
not
that,
a...
isn't that dequalified?
His argument, well,
This is a kind of discussion.
his argument is not dependent on other parts.
Anders, you're opening a can of worms here, in fairness to Roxana's context. I mean, the division between analytic and continental
I guess,
is based on German obscurantism. As
I guess
West. I mean, Hegel is not clear, and Heidegger is not clear in the way.
Small, to finish my idea.
Excuse me.
I didn't mean this to close the issue, but just to say it's not because of lack of arguments that there's a criticism here. Of course, to develop these criticisms will take another session. And those arguments are not dependent on other aspects of Carnap. It's not dependent on his, for example, his verificationism or his logical positivism. That's all I want to say. Thanks.
Quite a bit, actually.
Let's give Roxana a hand for a nice presentation.
Okay.
How do we get back to our respective hotels?
Oh, that's a very practical question. Maybe I'm hoping they have a fleet of taxis, like another 85 taxis outside to take us all over the city, but maybe not. I don't know how.
I don't remember all the streets.
I don't know how.
We have a map.
I have a map, but I don't know.
Well, we'll soon find out. If anyone's outside, we can ask that. I suspect. I don't know. There's no announcement about it. I don't know housekeeping. You know, I know what you're saying because I've been where it is exactly. I love it. I thought it was like 5 kilometers. It's not that close. I think, I'm guessing.